For the second time in 3 years, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham earmarked $10 million in state capital funding for a new reproductive health and abortion clinic in northern New Mexico. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has announced it's cutting 2 programs that could directly affect New Mexico farmers. With President Donald Trump set to sign an executive order that could dissolve the Department of Education, it still remains in question how that will affect New Mexico's students. Solomon Pena, who was described as the mastermind who orchestrated a string of shootings at the homes of New Mexico Democratic officials, was convicted by a federal jury. And a fashion designer from Taos is one of the semifinalists for the prestigious LVMH award. From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Thursday, March 20th, and I'll have more on those stories in a few moments, plus a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast on the other side of this break.
This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, we've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. We work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join us in our mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years.
For the second time in 3 years, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham has earmarked $10 million in state capital funding for a new reproductive health and abortion clinic, which has reignited a heated debate at the Roundhouse. The funding, part of a $1.2 billion infrastructure package, led Republican lawmakers to withdraw their support for the bill, though it ultimately passed with Democratic backing. Republicans, led by Representative Rod Montoya, attempted to remove the funding from House Bill 450, arguing it was a misuse of taxpayer dollars and primarily benefited out-of-state patients seeking abortion services. However, Democrats defended the allocation, emphasizing the need for expanded reproductive health access in northern New Mexico. New Mexico has become a key destination for abortion services since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. With neighboring states like Texas imposing strict bans, out-of-state patients, mainly from Texas, accounted for about 70% of the 21,000 abortions performed in New Mexico in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue we've covered pretty extensively over the last few years.
My colleague Dan Boyd is the Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief and has been covering the legislative session.
Governor Lujan Grisham has made no bones about being, a safe haven state for people seeking an abortion, whether that's in New Mexico or in neighboring states like Texas. That since the U.S. Supreme Court ruling a few years back, some states like Texas have enacted abortion bans, and a lot of women from that state and from other states have come to New Mexico seeking those type of services, and the governor has kind of welcomed that. She's pushed for some laws kind of shielding providers, things like that. We've also seen this play out in the courts. So this is kind of the latest development in that. But I think the way it came about and the surprise element is, I think, what took some people a little off guard today.
Despite GOP opposition, Democrats held firm, warning that removing the funding could prompt the governor to veto other projects in retaliation. The bill also allocates $50 million to complete stalled infrastructure projects, particularly in rural areas. While Republicans opposed the bill due to the abortion funding, some praised its efforts to finish long-delayed projects. The United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, has ended 2 key federal programs, the Local Food Purchase Assistance and Local Food for Schools programs, that help schools and food banks buy food from local farmers.
So these programs provide money from the federal government to purchase locally produced food. So that includes produce. It also includes beef and cattle.
My colleague Kathy Cook covers the federal government for the Journal.
And it was both of these programs were created during 2021 to help shore up the domestic agriculture production supply chain, basically. And so it specifically helps small farmers and small agricultural producers in New Mexico. And the way it works is that the federal government gives the state of New Mexico money, and then the state uses that money. It gives it to food banks and schools, who are then able to use those funds to buy local produce for the food banks and for the schools.
However, last week, the USDA announced it would cancel $1 billion in purchasing as these pandemic-era programs come to an end. The decision is already impacting farmers in New Mexico who rely on these programs for a steady revenue stream. Many have already planted crops intended for food banks and school lunch programs, only to find find out that the funding has been cut. Julia Chano of Reunity Resources, a nonprofit vegetable farm in Santa Fe, explained that farmers have been planting for months based on the assumption that the funding would continue.
Mid-March, seed is in the ground, seedlings are in the greenhouse, with the intention of them going to the food depot, with the intention of these seeds already planted going to our school lunches. And now the funding's been cut. We have been planning on this for months, and the work and investment from farmers has already taken place.
Now, without these funds, some farmers may struggle to sell their crops. For the 2025 fiscal year, the USDA had already planned to spend nearly $5.7 million for the local Food for Schools program and $2.8 million for the local food purchase assistance program here in New Mexico. The Navajo Nation was supposed to receive $2.1 million, and the Pueblo of Zuni was allocated $77,855. Organizations like Mugru Mobile Grocery, which buys food from local farmers and distributes it to communities, also relied on these funds. Mugru had a $120,000 contract in 2024 through the local food purchase assistance program, with $98,000 going directly to farmers. Without these funds, many small farms may face financial instability. Beyond farmers, food banks will also feel the impact. Jill Dixon, executive director of the Food Depot, emphasized that while food banks will try to fill the gap, they cannot replace millions of dollars in federal funding. This means that fresh, locally grown food is replaced with bulk purchased items from out of state, affecting the quality and nutrition of food available to families in need.
So it means some of that really critical nutrition that we were talking about that people have never seen in their homes or seen in a limited way won't be there any longer. And maybe that means that bulk potatoes bought out of Washington take its place. The food banks are going to do the very best that they can. We always rise, but we cannot replace what has been part of this program the same way.
The program also played a key role in encouraging younger generations to enter farming, an industry that has struggled to attract new farmers due to economic instability. Manny Encinas, a farmer from Buffalo Creek Ranch, said the local food purchase assistance program gave young farmers a reliable revenue stream while helping feed local communities.
This is truly a demonstration of a successful model that, like I keep telling people, is already making America good again.
In response to the USDA's decision, Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico, along with 31 other senators, has urged the agency to reconsider. They argue that at a time when food insecurity remains high, providing fresh food to food banks while supporting local farmers is critical. However, unless the USDA reverses course, farmers and food banks will have to find alternate solutions to make up for this loss of funding. President Donald Trump is set to sign an executive order on Thursday, eliminating the U.S. Department of Education. This fulfills a long-standing campaign promise. However, how this decision will impact New Mexico remains uncertain. The Department of Education distributes billions of dollars to schools and universities nationwide, including New Mexico's public school system and higher education institutions. Albuquerque Public Schools, which receives $345 million in federal grants and relies heavily on Title I funding for economically disadvantaged students, is particularly concerned about the future of these funds. While APS officials believe federal funding may continue in some form, the fate of Title I funding remains unclear, especially since Project 2025, a conservative policy blueprint, calls for its elimination. Higher education institutions, including the University of New Mexico, are also monitoring the situation closely, but have refrained from speculating on potential impacts. UNM officials have stated that they will respond only to specific federal actions once more details emerge.
Well, the University of New Mexico and APS, so the largest district and the largest university system in the state.
My colleague Noah Kalabach covers education for the Journal.
Both said it's unclear. The big thing that the Department of Education does is shell out, grant funding to schools across the country, whether they be elementary school, middle schools, high schools, colleges. But it's not entirely clear what will happen to that funding. Maybe it gets distributed by Congress or another branch of government, or maybe, like the Department of Education, it goes away.
The order follows a significant downsizing of the Department of Education, with 1,300 jobs cut earlier this month. The draft, obtained by the Wall Street Journal, instructs Education Secretary Linda McMahon to take the necessary steps to dissolve the department, leaving open questions about how education funding will be managed going forward. A federal jury has found Solomon Pena guilty on all 13 charges related to orchestrating shootings at the homes of 4 Democratic officials in New Mexico following his 2022 election loss. Prosecutors labeled Pena as the mastermind behind the attacks, motivated by his defeat in a state house race, which he falsely claimed was rigged. Pena faces a mandatory 60-year prison sentence with a hearing set within 90 days. His attorneys argued that the shootings were carried out solely by his co-defendants Jose and Demetrio Trujillo, both of whom testified against him as part of plea deals. However, prosecutors presented text messages and testimony showing Pena directed and even participated in the attacks, allegedly firing a round from an AR-15 style pistol at the home of State Senator Linda Lopez. The shootings, which occurred between December 2022 and January 2023, targeted 2 state lawmakers and 2 Bernalillo County commissioners, including officials who had certified the election results. No injuries were reported, but bullets penetrated the walls of homes, including the bedroom where a 10-year-old child was sleeping. Pena also faces additional federal charges for allegedly attempting to hire hitmen in prison to kill the Trujillos. His attorneys plan to appeal the conviction, arguing that the case was politically motivated. Albuquerque Police Chief Harold Medina welcomed the verdict, stating it reinforces that political violence will not be tolerated. Josh Tafoya, a fashion designer from Rancho Steakhouse, recently returned from an intense and career-defining week in Paris, where he competed as a semifinalist for the prestigious LVMH prize. This award, organized by the French luxury giant LVMH, is one of the most significant recognitions for emerging designers. Tafoya was one of 20 semifinalists selected from over 2,000 applicants, vying for a spot among the 8 finalists to be announced later this month.
Quite an incredible honor just to be a semifinalist for this very prestigious award.
My colleague Logan Beitman is an arts reporter for the Journal.
And Josh is a really interesting fashion designer as well, because he's using his own family traditions of weaving that go way back, very old traditions in New Mexico. And he's combining that with very cutting edge fashion techniques from haute couture, especially like kind of punk inspired deconstruction techniques where you chop up and rearrange pieces in unusual ways. So he's doing that with these very old, labor-intensive forms of weaving that he does. So it's really pretty stunning what he does, and it's really everything he does tells a story about where he's from and about New Mexico.
The competition brought Tafoya face-to-face with some of the biggest names in fashion, including Vogue editor-in-chief Anna Wintour, industry professionals, buyers from high-end retailers, and celebrities like Jaden Smith. He presented his collection to this influential audience who, along with public votes, will determine the finalists. Tafoya's work is deeply personal, rooted in his Spanish, Chicano, and Janicero heritage. His designs revive traditional New Mexico textile arts, particularly Rio Grande Valley weaving, an art form that faded in his family. Inspired by his grandmother, a weaver, he has dedicated years to mastering this craft. Instead of simply weaving traditional rectangular patterns, he abstracts and reshapes them into dynamic sculptural garments. Some of his pieces take up to 2 months to complete, standing in stark contrast to fast fashion. Tafoya's journey into fashion began with a degree from Parsons School of Design, followed by a brief stint in New York's fashion industry. However, the pandemic led him back home, where he immersed himself in weaving and rediscovered his family's artistic traditions. Competing for the LVMH prize marked a major milestone for Tafoya, who had never shown his work outside of New Mexico on such a grand stage. The week was hectic, but on the final night, he and his fellow semifinalists, many of whom have traveled from around the world, finally had time to celebrate together, sharing champagne and forming friendships that will last beyond the competition. Regardless of the outcome, Tafoya is grateful for the experience, which has opened new doors and cemented his place in the global fashion conversation. If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on The Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect mostly sunny skies with a high near 61, and for this evening partly cloudy with a low around 30. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. I'm Gino Gutierrez. The Leading News will be back tomorrow.